Now that we have the basic elements of our environment modeled, we need to think about texturing them as well. But before we can texture any of the objects, we need to UV map them. Now, if you're unfamiliar with UV mapping, please take a look at my lynda.com course, Blender UV Mapping. It'll introduce you to the concepts of UV mapping, what it is, why we use it, and the general tools that Blender has available to us to UV map our objects. But in a nutshell, UV mapping is just the process of creating a two-dimensional representation of our 3D objects. And then we can paint or apply imagery to that 2D template, and that visual information or texture will appear on our 3D object. So if you've had some experience with UV mapping, then let's go ahead and keep moving forward. For me, I like to change my screen layout view here from the default to Blender's UV editing. I think it gives me a nice view of the windows I need when UV mapping. I'm going to zoom out a bit here. And so over here is our UV editing window. We're going to be creating our UV maps and arranging our UV islands here. So to begin with, let's start with this main cylinder piece of the building. I'm going to tab into edit mode, and by default the UV editing screen layout here has this ghost image view, and I don't really like that. I'm going to middle mouse button click and drag this view over to this button here and click that to turn that off. Now I can drag this bar back over. So for this cylinder, I'm going to deselect everything with the A key, and I'm going to hover over the cylinder and press the L key, and that will select just the pieces that are connected, are linked in that piece of the object. I can then press Shift H, and that will hide everything that is unselected. So now let's think about how we want to break this object up. First of all, I think we want to place our seam, our main vertical seam for this, at the back of the object. So I'm going to press Alt and select this edge. I don't think we want to split this top piece like this. I'll deselect this edge and deselect this edge. In addition, I think we probably want to split out this top rim and the bottom rim from the main part of the cylinder, because I think those are going to have slightly different textures. So I will deselect these here and deselect these here. So now I have just that edge at the back of the main part of the cylinder, and to create a seam there, I'm going to press Ctrl E and choose Mark Seam. Now when I deselect that with the A key, you can see that it's created that reddish orange highlight to that edge. Alright, so let's create a couple of other seams, maybe one here, Ctrl E, Mark Seam, and another one down here. With this one, Alt, click, and Ctrl E, Mark Seam. I think in addition I will break out the top as well. Perhaps this edge should have a seam, and perhaps this edge down here should have a seam. There we go. So now we've got seams to break up our object. I'm going to press the A key to select everything for that object, and then to actually create the UV islands for this, I'm going to press U on the keyboard to bring up the UV mapping menu, and then I'll click Unwrap. Now the UV map comes out in kind of a stretched, pulled, distorted way here. And that's not exactly what we want. We want everything to be proportional to the object in the 3D view. If we tried to apply our textures to these islands, our textures would look stretched on the object. So what happened here? Well, let's go back over here and let me just press U again and hit Unwrap. And up here you can see it says Object has non-uniform scale. So let's go back to the default view in our screen layout, and let's take a look at what's happening here. I'm going to press Alt-H to bring all the pieces of the object back. and I'll press Tab to go back into object mode. Now I'll press the N key to bring up the Properties panel. And if we look here in the scale, you can see that the values in the scale fields are something other than 1 or non-uniform. What we need to do is apply the scale and the rotation here so that these are all back to a uniform state. So to do that, we can select the object and then press Control A, and now we can apply the rotation and the scale of the object. So I'll click this, and now take a look at it. We've got the scale at 1 and the rotation at 0s. So it resets our default scale and rotation based on the way the object is now. Alright, so now let's go back to the UV editing view, and I'm going to tab back into edit mode here. I'll select just that main cylinder that we've been working on, so I'll just hover over it and press the L key. Now it splits it up based on the seams we've created, but I'll just hover over that and press the L key and here, and there we go. So now that's all selected. I'll press Shift H to hide the unselected, and now I'll just press U and unwrap. And now our UV islands are much more uniform and proportional to our 3D object. Alright, so let's work on the other pieces as well. I'll press Alt H to bring them back, and I'll just select, how about one of these windows here? I'll press Shift H, and then I'll press the period key on the numpad to zoom in. Now we're going to need to split this window out between the window pane and the window frame. And I think all we need to do is just put a seam there. So I'll select that edge, press Control E, and mark seam. Now let's try this. I'm going to press the A key to select everything, press U, and unwrap. Now my concern here is with the outside of the window frame. Is flattening this piece out going to stretch the texture along the outside edges here? We can come over here and turn on the stretch view, and as you can see, everything that is dark blue will not be stretched, but anything that's moving towards reddish tells us that we're going to get some stretching there. I may not mind a little stretching on the inside, but I think on the outside that may be a little too much. So one thing we can do, one thing we can try, is we could select this outside edge here and give it a seam. And perhaps right up here on the top, let's give it a seam here. And the reason why I'll put it on the top is because our character will generally be running around looking up at the windows, and therefore we don't want a seam here. We want to try and hide visible seams as much as possible, putting seams in logical breaks in the texture, or just trying to hide it away from the view of the character. So I'll just hide that up here. So I'll hit A to select all of the object, then I'll press the U key for the UV mapping menu and click Unwrap. And there we go. And that breaks that piece out into a less stretched island. So this is the way we would probably want to UV map the rest of the windows. I'll press Alt H to bring everything back. But let's go ahead and work on the door here. I'll hover over it and press the L key, press Shift H, and I'll hit the period key to frame it up. Now for this we're going to need to separate the door from the door frame once again. So we're going to need a seam here. I'll press Control E and mark seam. And in addition, we're probably going to want to break this piece out as well. So I'll mark a seam here as well. All right, let's take a look at how this works. I'll select it all with the A key, I'll press U, and then I'll click Unwrap. Now we've got a bit of strangeness here. Let's switch over to from angle base to conformal and see if that helps. A little bit, but we're still getting some strangeness there. So let's take a look at what we can do with that. It looks to me like it's the front part of the door frame, so perhaps I'll just select this edge here and add a seam to this. Let's try that. Select everything, U, and Unwrap. That looks a little better. I just didn't want this archway to be quite that deformed. The last part of this building is the doorknob. So I'll tab into edit mode here and press Alt-H to bring everything back. And now I'll select this doorknob here. I'll hover over that and press the L key, and hover over this and press the L key, and Shift-H to hide everything, and period to zoom in. Now this particular part is going to be pretty small in the frame, pretty small in the scene, and I think it's going to have a pretty uniform color to it. There isn't going to be much of a texture to it. So I don't think I'm going to get too detailed with the UV mapping. I think for the plate here, I'll just select it with the L key, and since it has no back to it, no thickness, I think I can just select it all and press U and unwrap. And there it is. Now, yes, there's some stretching, but as I say, I think it's just going to be a uniform color, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. For the doorknob here, perhaps I'll just select this edge, and then Alt-Shift select this edge. And let's see how that breaks it up. I'll press Control-E, mark seam. I'll hover over it, and press L for those two parts, and then I'll press U and unwrap. Let me switch from angle base to conformal. Alright, so we need to take a look at the doorknob itself. I think we're going to need to split this up like this. Say we give it a couple of edges here, a couple of edges here, and just come around breaking it out maybe every 2 or 3 faces here. Something like that. Mark the seam, and let's try it again. L and L here, and press U and unwrap. And that looks a little better. Alright, so let's press Alt-H to bring everything back. Now with all the edges marked and the pieces UV mapped, we can select everything with the A key, and you can see that it's pretty much a mess. Everything is overlapping, and we don't want that. So Blender has some great tools to help us fix this. Under here in UVs, we've got tools for average island scale and for pack islands. Average island scale will make sure everything in our UV editor here is proportionally sized to everything in the 3D view, and pack islands will pack everything into this square or to the 0 to 1 space. So I'll press average island scale, and then I'll come back and click pack islands. Now the shortcut for these is Control A and Control P. So I'll click pack islands, and now here we are. Everything is packed into the 0 to 1 space or within this square here. Now we can uncheck rotate and it'll flip it around. So I think that looks pretty good. I think I'll do that. Now there are a couple of pieces here that I don't think we need to have be so big. And those are the top and the bottom. We're really not going to see those too much, if at all. I'm leaving the faces on here just in case as we put together the level we want to tip one over or see the bottom or top of one just in case. But the textures probably don't need to be quite so prominent on the UV map. So what I want to do is I want to select these and scale them down so they don't appear quite as big and take up so much space. So I'm going to come down here to UV Island Select, and I'll just click on this one and shift click this island. I'm going to press the S key, and I'm going to scale these two down quite a bit. Something like this. Now if I select everything, and instead of using average island scale again, which will just pop those back to being big again, I'll go straight to pack islands. So if I click this or press Control P, it will pack everything in like this. Now once again, do these pieces here need to be so big in the frame? They're taking up quite a bit of room. I'm going to try selecting these and scaling them down just a bit more as well. Something like that. Now let's select all and this time press Control P, and these pieces are still staying pretty small. The only other thing I think I could do is maybe take this and scale it down. And now select everything and press Control P. And that kind of re-establishes the scale relative to each other. So once again, you can use this average island scale, but sometimes it doesn't use the UV space as efficiently as we might like. Okay, so there is the UV map for our first building. But in the next video, I think I'd like to take a look at UV mapping the pipes and the light fixture.